Okay, so using my cup here, I wanted to show you a little bit about the pivot point. I talked about this a little bit when I was showing you the parenting video with the books here. But so this pivot point, right? This is always going to be the geometric center of the object, right? So you can see it's not the center of the cup, it's the central mass of the object itself, right? That's the default, right? The default is always going to be that, right? But you can change this as well. So if you wanted to change where this pivot point is, so you see how I'm rotating the cup around this pivot point, right? It's rotating, right? It's rotating the cup around that. If you wanted to change where this positioning is, there's a couple ways to do it. So the first way is you can just come to the Move tool, double click. That's going to bring up this tool settings menu here. And there's a lot of things you can do with this, but I'm only going to show you basically what you need to know. Some of these things are, the amount of control and precision you can have can be kind of overwhelming. But for basically what we want to do here is anytime you want to move this pivot, you can just hit Edit Pivot, and then it's going to show you, right, the rotation sphere, and it's going to show you the handles, and you can just click and drag and move this anywhere, right? You can even move it outside the object, so that if you want to, have something that rotates around like a central axis, right, you can do that. And then it's not going to lock in until you get out of edit pivot mode. So I'm going to come back here, get out of edit pivot mode. And then we can see if I go to rotate, you see it rotates around that central pivot point. Okay. So I'm going to come back to edit pivot. Anytime you want to get back to the geometric center, you can just hit edit reset, and that'll take it right back to the center. And then the other thing I want to show you is there's a couple different axis orientations you can do. So right now, let me just get out of this so you can kind of see. So right now, my object, right, let's just say if I want, let's say you want to get something back, upright the way that you made it. I'm just going to do this here. I'm just going to put the translate positionings all back to 0. So that's where the cup was when I made it. I'm going to select it. Let me move this up here a little bit. Okay, so it's a little bit wonky because when I made it, I wasn't quite, at the right 90 degrees. But anyways, that's fine. So if you notice, right, the orientation of the object, right, this orientation, right, it's relative to the object. You see how this isn't quite a straight line? I'll demonstrate this better. Okay, so you see how the axis, right, the y-axis is in alignment with the object. Okay, so here, let me show you what I mean by this. I'm going to double click. So the axis orientation is with the object. Okay, now what I can do is I can change that to world, meaning that the axis now is going to be relevant to the grid, right? To this, right, 90 degrees from this perpendicular plane, right, as opposed to the object, right? So that's, I'm not sure when, you would want to do that, but I can think of times when it would be necessary to change that. The other thing you can do is you can also customize this. You can customize this to be, let me go to edit pivot. So if we go to custom, that means, whatever I kind of set this as, it will lock that in as the orientation, right? So now there is no object orientation and there is no world orientation, if that makes sense, okay? Lastly, the other thing you can do, I'm going to come back to edit pivot, is you can also just kind of highlight around the object. You can select a face, you can select an edge, or you can select a vertex, and you can align the pivot to any of these faces, edges, or vertexes. Okay, so that's just a little bit about the pivot. Again, I'm sure you'll find uses for it later, but that's the way that you can do it. Now, the other way that you can do it without just double clicking here is anytime you hit D. So if you hit D, that's going to put it into this edit pivot mode. You have to excuse this because my computer thinks I'm just slamming that, but so D will put you into edit pivot mode, right? And then letting go of D will snap it back on, right? If you want to do the orientation thing, the axis orientation, you're going to have to do it from here. But just a quick edit of the pivot, if you want to move the pivot point, just hit D and then release to get out of that. Okay.